Hello and welcome to the Angling Flaneurs. We're going to be touching a different subject today. We're going to have an old man rant about the future of Test cricket. I planned to go to the first Test match 4th day with my son, seeing them through the West Indies at Lord's, but those who follow cricket will know that the game, Jimmy's farewell Test appearance, was over pretty much by lunch on day 3. I know Test matches finishing on day 3 is nothing new. Ever since I've been watching Test cricket from the early 70s, it's often happened that games finished on day 3. It's nothing unusual there. But what I think really upset me was the display by the West Indies team. Now, I don't blame them at all. This is just a failure of the ICC to properly promote Test cricket. I'm an English cricket fan, but I truly love the West Indies. It's a bit like that old cliche that in international football, everybody's favourite second team in England is Brazil. I was brought up on the legends of West Indian Test cricketers in the 1970s and 80s. Obviously, there were many before, but I grew up, and in the picture you're seeing now, you'll see Viv scoring 291 at the Oval in August 1976. I was there that day when he scored the 291, and of course there are other great legends in that time. Sir Garfield Sobers, Michael Holding, Greenwich, Haynes, and you could go on. And in the next clip you'll see the great Michael Holding bowling at a not middle stump, and this was part of his match-winning 14 for 149 performance, and it was arguably the greatest display of fast bowling that I've ever seen. These performances were so notable that they stick in the memory, and even 48 years later, there's still something that you think about from time to time, and they'll always be there. They're just iconic moments in the game, and I think even 50 years from now, you'll still be looking at some of the clips from that time. So this post is going to be about my rant, not just about the sad demise of West Indian cricket, which is very close to my heart, but also the demise generally of Test cricket. I'm going to try and be objective about weighing the possible future of Test cricket about T20. I just don't want to come across as someone who's ranting just about how cricket is today and the growth of T20. As we've seen in the earlier clips with Michael Holding and Viv Richards, Test cricket just brings about some of these images that will never be forgotten. We're seeing both of them bat against Jeff Lawson in the famous Test match at Headingley in 1981. Much as I see the merit of T20, and I'll go on about that a little later in the blog, images like this will never be forgotten, and I do wonder if performances in T20, though they're very good in their own space, though you'll ever remember them 40, 50 years on. Someone scoring a 50, say, or 15 to 20 deliveries in a T20 or taking a 4 or 5 foot is pretty decent, but are they memorable? I'm showing you some footage of the ball of the century, Shane Warne's ball to dismiss Mike Gatting at the Old Trafford Test match in 1993. I don't know how many times this footage has been replayed, but I'm going to guess it's in the millions, maybe even more. Shane Warne was such a wonderful, iconic cricketer. I wonder if he'd played more T20 or T20 had been around when he started his career, that any success there would quite as meant as much as the great success he got in Test cricket, finally taking 708 Test wickets. Then there is the late great Malcolm Denzel Marshall, who, in my view, arguably the fastest and greatest bowler of all time. Test cricket is what made these greats so memorable. They had the chance to show their skill over 5 days in different conditions and with different game situations. And as the word says, it is a true test. I just don't think one day internationals or T20, where you've got a limit of 4 overs, or maybe you're going to bat for no more than 50, 60 deliveries, that you can really show those memorable skills that Test cricket has produced. And in this footage we can also see the greatest arguably the greatest swing bowler of all time in Wasim Akram. And what I really love about Test cricket is those great duels and matchups that you see that I think over the space of a few deliveries that you're just not going to see in T20. Now, this is the great Malcolm Marshall bowling to Graham Gooch. And I used to love these duels. I'm thinking back to Gooch's 154 not out against the West Indies in 1991. So for 2 days you could see a great opening batsman batting against the greatest fast bowler of all time. 2 days almost. You're on the edge of your seat for that time. And I just don't think that T20 could ever offer that kind of entertainment. And in that contest, you saw two of the greatest cricketers pit their skills against each other for that length of time. Now that's my bit on Test cricket done for the time being. Now I'm going to go to the T20 that was recently held, T20 World Cup in the West Indies. Now we can see the Scotland team coming out into the field now. Their exploits in the recent T20 were all inspiring. They should have beaten Australia. Maybe they would have beaten England if rain hadn't ruined the match. And I think the minor nations coming to the party, as it were, on these occasions has been something great about T20. And then there's the most wonderful story about cricket over the last 15 to 20 years, and that has been the emergence of Afghanistan. And let's be honest, would that have happened if they could only play Test cricket? Really, the T20 has brought that about with superb bowlers like Rashid Khan, and you can see them here beating Australia. Well, that's great in itself. Who doesn't like to beat Australia? And Afghanistan got through to the semi-finals and really are now a true cricketing power. And I don't think that would have happened, as I said, without the emergence of T20. And there's the wonderful cricket team of Nepal, who are being touted as the next one to make it in cricket. You know, a bit like Afghanistan of 15, 20 years ago. The crowd support is something incredible in Nepal. They're so passionate about the game. I think they could rival anybody in the world with their passion for the game. And again, with T20, we've seen the emergence of countries like Nepal, maybe even, for example, Oman, Uganda. And T20 has brought a lot more countries to the party, if you like, than Test cricket ever could. And I read a story this morning about how Germany, for example, are desperate to get into the next T20 World Cup through the qualifiers. So who would have ever thought that in a few years' time that you could see maybe England playing Germany at T20 cricket? So there's a lot of very good things about T20, but I think it can be overplayed. And I think maybe at the moment, with all the franchises, there's too much of it. But I don't blame the individual cricketers. Going back to the state of the West Indies, you know, they pay their players a very small amount of money for playing Test cricket, maybe 30, 40, 50,000 pounds a year. And a lot of these guys can earn 10, 15, 20 times, maybe even more, that amount of money by playing franchise cricket, T20. So you don't blame these guys. And then there's the share out of the ICC money. Now, India get 41%. I think England and Australia share about 30%. And the rest go to the other test nations and then to the associate nations. Now, I know a lot of Indian fans would argue that they deserve that 41%. It's a country of roughly about 1.5 billion people. You know, the national sport is cricket. They're mad about it, fanatical about it. But I think to listen to the West Indies Cricket Board and Johnny Gray recently, that unless that money is shared out, unless you can play West Indies players to play Test cricket and you can pay them a decent amount that's comparable or nearly comparable to what they can earn in T20 franchises, that really we're going to see the death of Test cricket. I mean, last week's Test match, though I was going to go, and this might sound a contradiction, was so upsetting and was not something I really wanted to watch. To see a West Indies team come here, get beaten by an innings and 114 runs, with England only scoring 371 in their first innings, and not really putting up a show. But I don't really blame them. They'd had no preparation. Many of the players have hardly played any first-class cricket. It wasn't their fault. This is the fault of the ICC and the cricket administrators. Please save Test cricket for the reasons that I've gone into. I want Test cricket to be hard, competitive, and I want two teams of similar ability pitted against each other. At the moment, this is just a mismatch. We've got the second Test match at Trent Nottingham this week, and I just don't really think that I really want to just see the humiliation of the West Indies. It's just awful. When you think in the past, you've seen the likes of Viv, Michael Holding, Malcolm Marshall, Joel Garner, Ian Bishop, you could go on and on. Brian Lara, of course. And just to see the state of West Indies Test cricket at the moment, it's just really upsetting. So please, this is my rant. ICC, do something about Test cricket. Yes, I'd like to see maybe a split. 6 months of the year playing Test cricket, 6 months of the year playing T20. Look, this is just a solution off the top of my head. I'm not saying it's necessarily the answer, but let's have the conversation. This is because we can't let Test cricket die. It might only be played amongst 7, 8, 9 nations, but it's got to keep going because the memorable moments of this game have really come from the exploits of Test cricketers. And I'll leave you with Sachin Tendulkar, arguably the greatest Indian Test batsman, with Sunil Gavaskar, and you see him play Test cricket here. Yes, we're in the land of India and the IPL, and we can see that as the really powerful competition in the world. But let's not forget what Test cricket has brought to this great game. And if you want to read about that great Test series of 1976, between England and the West Indies, arguably one of the greatest Test series in my estimation, then you can go to my book. There's also a little bit of music about there, a lot of punk rock, which you might know from my previous vlogs that I'm a bit of a fan of. That might not appeal to everyone, but I think there's enough cricket in there for most people and most cricket lovers. So that's my rant over. I know I've gone on for a long time, but ICC, please save Test cricket.